My name is Harper Whitmore, and until that night, I thought I knew exactly who I was, the eldest daughter of a powerful man, a quiet disappointment in designer heels. I was 34, an art restorer in Chicago, the kind of woman who smelled like varnish and old books, while the rest of my family smelled like money and legacy. Then, during my father's lavish 70th birthday party, everything shattered. He raised his glass, smiled for the cameras, then slapped me across the face so hard the room froze. "You're a disgrace to the family name, Harper," he roared. "I'm cutting you from the $230 million will." The guests gasped, phones lifted, flashes exploded. Some laughed, some filmed, and I, humiliated, trembling, walked out into the freezing Chicago night, mascara streaking down my cheeks. The next morning, someone knocked on my door. 3 lawyers, and they weren't from my father. When my father's hand struck my cheek, the sound echoed through the ballroom like a gunshot. Crystal glasses clinked, and then silence. Only the slow hum of the chandelier filled the air before the whispers began. Cameras lifted. People grinned behind their champagne. Did he just? Oh my God. He slapped her. I could barely breathe. The room tilted, the floor spinning beneath my heels. My father, Richard Whitmore, real estate magnate, stood tall in his custom Italian suit, his gray eyes colder than the marble pillars around us. "You think you can shame me, Harper?" he growled. "A daughter who fixes old furniture instead of running the company? You're nothing but an embarrassment." "Dad, please," I choked, feeling every eye pierce through me. "This isn't the place." "This is exactly the place," he thundered. "Maybe now you'll finally learn your worth." Nothing. He raised his glass again, smiling as though he'd just made a toast. Around him, people awkwardly clapped, unsure if this was some cruel family joke or a real public execution of pride. My stepmother, Vivian, immaculate in her emerald gown, placed a perfectly manicured hand on his arm. "Richard, enough," she whispered, but her voice trembled, not with pity, with fear. I turned away, blinking back tears, but the flashes from dozens of phones followed me. My younger brother Cole, the heir apparent, looked at me with something between pity and victory. "Harper, just leave," he murmured. "You're making it worse. Making it worse. As if I'd started any of this." I grabbed my clutch, ignored the murmurs, and pushed through the crowd. Outside, snow was falling softly, muting the city's noise. I stood there in the cold, breath shaking, cheek burning, mascara dripping onto my gloves. That slap wasn't just skin on skin. It was 34 years of resentment condensed into one brutal act. I'd never wanted my father's empire, only his respect. And now, in front of 200 people, he'd made sure the world knew I was no longer a Whitmore. I called a cab, but my phone wouldn't stop buzzing, notifications exploding. A number, "Billionaire Dad Slaps Daughter," was already trending. By the time I got home, the video had millions of views. My shame was now viral content. I locked my apartment door, slid down to the floor, and screamed until my throat went raw. I stared at my reflection in the window, the bruise forming along my jawline, and whispered to myself, "You're free now. You're free." But I didn't believe it. Not yet, because freedom shouldn't feel this empty. That night, as snow piled outside, I didn't know my entire life my very name was built on someone else's tragedy. The next morning, when the knock came at my door, it wasn't the press, or my father begging forgiveness. It was something far more unbelievable. At first, I thought it was the reporters. The pounding on my door came sharp and steady, 3 precise knocks that made my coffee tremble in the mug. I hesitated, heart still raw from the chaos of last night. "Miss Whitmore?" a woman's voice called, calm and professional. "We're here on behalf of your biological father." I froze. Biological father? I opened the door just a few inches. Standing there were 3 people who looked as though they'd walked straight out of a courtroom drama, a tall woman with silver-streaked hair tied neatly back, flanked by 2 men in immaculate suits. The woman extended a business card. "Judith Blackwell, Senior Partner, Blackwell and Hartman LLP. "May we come in, Miss Whitmore?" she asked gently. "This conversation isn't one for a hallway." I hesitated, then stepped aside. My apartment small, cluttered with art supplies and unfinished projects, suddenly felt like a confession booth. Judith took a seat at my kitchen table, folding her hands. My colleagues are Mr. Reeves and Mr. Chen. We represent Mr. Magnus Carver. The name meant nothing to me. Who? She inhaled slowly. Your biological father, Miss Whitmore. He's been searching for you for 35 years. The words didn't make sense. I laughed, half disbelief, half hysteria. You've got the wrong person. My father's Richard Whitmore, unfortunately still very much alive and yelling at the news. Judith exchanged a glance with the younger man. He opened a leather briefcase and carefully placed a thin file on the table. My name, Harper Whitmore, was printed neatly on the tab. This file, Judith said, sliding it toward me, contains records from the Portland Police Department. A missing child case, June 1990. Female infant, 6 months old. Name, Lila Carver. I felt something twist in my stomach. That's not me. Judith's eyes softened. Your DNA says otherwise. I stared at her, waiting for the punchline that never came. Then, she pulled out a photograph, a young couple smiling in a park, holding a baby wrapped in a yellow blanket. The man had dark hair and green eyes. The woman had my smile. My exact smile. This was taken 2 weeks before the kidnapping, Judith said quietly. The bracelet on the baby's wrist look familiar? I glanced down at my own wrist. The small silver bracelet I'd worn since childhood engraved with a tiny train engine glimmered in the morning light. My breath caught. No, I whispered. My father gave me this. He said it was a family heirloom. Judith's voice gentled, almost maternal. It was, just not his family's. Something inside me cracked. The room seemed to fold in on itself, and I sank into the chair. My father, the man who slapped me, disowned me, wasn't my father at all. And the people I'd called family had built my entire life on a lie. Judith opened the file fully now, her manicured fingers moving with surgical precision. Page after page slid across my kitchen table reports, faded photographs, newspaper clippings. This is the official case file of the kidnapping of Lila Carver, the 14th of June 1990, she began. You were taken from Laurelhurst Park in Portland, Oregon, while your nanny was distracted by a woman asking for directions. I pressed a trembling hand to my lips. That's insane. My mother Vivian, she couldn't have— Vivian Whitmore, Judith interrupted gently, matches the age-progressed composite of the suspect the police had 35 years ago. The FBI reopened the case 3 months ago, after a DNA match appeared in a genealogy database. That match was you. I felt the blood drain from my face. My voice cracked. You're saying she kidnapped me? Yes, Judith said softly. She and your husband Richard Whitmore falsified adoption documents through a closed agency in Mexico. They paid off a clerk to backdate everything. The younger lawyer, Mr. Chen, opened a separate folder and produced a birth certificate. My birth certificate. Not the one I'd grown up believing. Your biological mother was Eleanor Carver, a teacher. Your father Magnus is an aerospace engineer. He's spent the last 3 decades building one of the largest renewable energy corporations in the US, and searching for you. I stared at the photo Judith slid next Magnus and Eleanor in front of a small house, holding a baby. My baby self. My chest tightened as if a band were being cinched around my ribs. I don't understand, I whispered. Why me? Vivian's voice echoed in my memory. After 3 miscarriages, I thought I'd never be a mother. And the words hit differently now. Judith continued. Your nanny at the time, Maria Santos, confessed on her deathbed that she was paid $50,000 to look away for 5 minutes. She thought it was a private adoption, not a kidnapping. When she realized what had happened, she was too terrified to come forward. I felt nauseous. I wanted to scream, to deny everything, but the proof lay right there, neat, chronological, undeniable. Mr. Reeves, the older lawyer, spoke for the first time, his voice kind but firm. Mr. Carver never gave up hope. He updated his will every year, leaving a place for his daughter in case she was ever found. Harper, that daughter is you. Silence hung thick between us. Mr. Carver's estate is valued at over $2 billion, he added. But that's not why we're here. He doesn't care about the money. He just wants to see his child again. Tears welled in my eyes. I didn't know if they were from shock, grief, or the sudden understanding that my entire existence, every birthday, every photo had been someone else's tragedy. Judith's voice softened. "He's waiting downstairs, Harper. If you're ready, he'd like to meet you." My heart stopped. "He's here?" For a long moment, I couldn't move. My breath came shallow, uneven. My mind kept repeating one sentence over and over: "He's waiting downstairs." Judith stood quietly, giving me space to process. The ticking clock on my wall sounded deafening. I wiped my cheeks, took a trembling breath, and finally whispered, "Okay, I'll meet him." We rode the elevator in silence. My reflection in the metal doors looked pale, unfamiliar, like a stranger wearing my face. When the doors opened, the morning light flooded in, almost blinding. Standing near the building's entrance was a man in a dark gray coat, tall, composed, but with eyes that carried 35 years of loss. His silver hair glimmered faintly under the lobby lights. When he saw me, he froze, and for a moment, I saw the exact same green eyes that looked back at me in the photo upstairs. He didn't rush to me. He simply whispered, "Lila?" My throat closed. I think so," I managed to say, tears already spilling down my face. He took a hesitant step forward, voice shaking. "You still have it, the bracelet?" I looked down. The tiny silver train gleamed softly on my wrist. "You gave me this?" I asked, my voice breaking. His answer was just a nod, and then, "Your mother picked it out. She said you'd love the sound of trains." He covered his mouth with one hand, trying to contain a sob. For a man who had built an empire, he looked utterly fragile. "I wore the matching one every day," he said. "Every single day, hoping I'd see you wearing yours again." I didn't even realize I'd moved until I was standing in front of him. When his arms went around me, something inside me cracked open. He smelled faintly of cedar and rain, like home, a home I'd never known but had somehow always been missing. For the first time since that awful night, I felt safe. We stood there for a long time, just breathing. When we finally stepped apart, he wiped his eyes, smiling through tears. "Your mother, she would have loved to see you. She passed 5 years ago, but she never stopped believing you were alive." Ah, the words hit me harder than the slap from last night. "She's gone?" I whispered. He nodded. "But she left something for you, letters, journals, even the nursery she kept untouched all those years." A sob escaped my throat. "She kept my room? She refused to let me repaint it," he said, voice trembling with love and grief. "Every birthday, she'd leave a little gift inside. She said someday you'd come home to open them." I covered my face, crying into my palms. Everything I'd lost, everything I'd never known, had been waiting for me all along. That morning, in the arms of the father I'd never met, I finally understood sometimes family isn't who raises you. It's who never stops searching for you. 2 weeks later, the world that had collapsed around me shattered all over again, but this time, it wasn't my life being destroyed. It was theirs. I was sitting in Magnus's car, parked across from the Ravenswood Country Club, the same place my father, Richard Whitmore. I still struggled to call him anything else, played golf every Tuesday. My phone buzzed with a message from Judith. "It's happening. Stay in the car." Inside the club, laughter echoed from the terrace. I saw him, impeccable as always, wearing his crisp white polo, laughing with his business partners like nothing had happened. Vivian stood beside him, sun hat tilted just so, sipping her mimosa, every inch the picture of control. Then, the FBI cars rolled in. Doors slammed. Agents in navy jackets poured out. For the first time in my life, I saw Richard Whitmore's smile disappear. He turned, confusion flickering, then anger. "What the hell is this?" he shouted, backing away as 2 agents approached. "Richard Whitmore, Vivian Whitmore, you're under arrest for the kidnapping of Lila Carver 35 years ago," one of them said, voice steady and loud enough for the crowd to hear. Gasps rippled across the terrace. Golfers froze mid-swing. Phones came out, recording everything, poetic justice in real time. "This is insane," Richard bellowed, his voice cracking as they took his wrists. "I raised her. She's my daughter." "No," I whispered from the car, watching through the glass. "You stole me." Vivian began sobbing, mascara bleeding down her cheeks. "We just wanted a child," she cried, as if that could erase 35 years of deceit. I loved her. But love built on lies is still a cage. When they led them to the cars, the same socialites who had once recorded my humiliation now captured their downfall. I thought I'd feel triumphant. I thought watching him dragged away in handcuffs would fix something inside me. It didn't. I only felt hollow. Magnus reached over, resting a hand gently over mine. "You don't have to watch," he said softly. "I do," I murmured. "They took 35 years from you, and from me. I need to see how it ends." Richard's eyes found me through the crowd as he was pushed into the back of the police car. For the first time, there was no anger, no superiority, only something close to regret. His lips formed the words, "I'm sorry." I turned away. The world would know now, every paper, every channel. The perfect Whitmore family was nothing but a story stitched together by lies and fear. That night, as the headlines blazed, "Billionaire couple arrested in decades, old kidnapping," I sat in my apartment, staring at my reflection. I wasn't Harper Whitmore anymore. I was Lila Carver. And for the first time, that name didn't feel like a stranger's. It felt like the truth. When the court hearings began, my world turned into a blur of headlines and testimonies. Every network wanted an interview. Every magazine wanted a photo. But all I wanted was silence and answers. Magnus refused every offer to exploit the story. "We're not selling pain," he said simply. Instead, he took me home, not to his mansion or company headquarters, but to a modest 2-story house overlooking the Oregon coast. "This," he said quietly as he opened the front door, "is where your mother kept waiting." The moment I stepped inside, the air changed. The scent of old lavender and ocean salt filled the space. Everything was frozen in time, the floral wallpaper, the rocking horse in the corner, even a faded photo of a baby girl with a silver bracelet taped to the fridge. My hands trembled as Magnus handed me a small wooden box. The latch creaked as I opened it. Inside were dozens of envelopes, all addressed in delicate cursive. "To my Lila for when you come home." I couldn't breathe. My knees went weak. The first letter was dated the 14th of June 1990, the day I was taken. "My sweet girl, if you ever find this, know that not a day passes without me believing you're still out there. When I hear a train whistle, I imagine you laughing. When the rain hits the window, I imagine you sleeping safe somewhere." Ah, tears splashed onto the page. My vision blurred as I read the next. "Your father built you a toy chest. It's still in your room. He polishes it every year on your birthday. We never stop celebrating you." I pressed the letter to my chest and sobbed deep, aching sobs that came from a place words couldn't reach. Magnus knelt beside me, his own tears falling silently. She was extraordinary," he whispered. "When the police told us the trail was cold, she refused to give up. Every year, she mailed a photo of us to the Missing Children's Center. She said, if she ever sees us, she'll know where home is." I looked around the room. The nursery walls were still painted pale yellow. On the shelf sat a row of tiny books, their spines cracked from years of waiting. "I missed her whole life," I said, voice breaking. Magnus shook his head gently. "She wouldn't want you to think that way. You're here now. That's all that matters." I turned back to the letters, reading through them one by one, until the light outside dimmed. Each one was a heartbeat, each word a bridge reaching across time and grief. And for the first time, the hole inside me, the one carved by lies and loss, began to feel a little less empty, because even though my mother was gone, her love had been waiting for me all along. Weeks passed, and life became a strange mix of freedom and mourning. The media moved on to the next scandal, but I was still living inside the ashes of 2 lives. Harper Whitmore, the daughter of privilege and cruelty, and Lila Carver, the child who had been stolen, loved, and lost. The court summoned me to testify during Richard and Vivian's trial. Judith said I didn't have to face them, but I knew I needed to. Closure doesn't come from silence, it comes from confrontation. When I walked into the courtroom, all eyes turned. Richard sat at the defense table, his silver hair perfectly combed, but the arrogance was gone. Vivian looked smaller somehow, her hands shaking in her lap. The judge called me forward. My heels echoed on the polished floor. "State your name for the record," the clerk said. I took a breath. Lila Eleanor Carver. For a moment, the room went still. Richard's eyes lifted toward me, a flicker of disbelief, maybe even shame. Miss Carver, the prosecutor began, can you tell the court what you remember about your upbringing? I swallowed hard. I remember being told love came with conditions, I said, my voice trembling at first but growing stronger. That success meant obedience, that affection had to be earned. I didn't realize until now, none of that was love. It was control. Richard's jaw tightened. Vivian started to cry softly, whispering, I'm sorry, Harper. I turned to her. My name is Lila. The prosecutor nodded at me to continue. I used to think my father's approval was the only thing that mattered, I said, my throat thickening. But now I understand something. Love that destroys someone's spirit isn't love at all. You didn't raise me. You trained me to be afraid of failing you. Tears blurred my vision. But you couldn't erase who I really was. Even after everything, the truth still found me. The courtroom was silent, except for the scratching of the stenographer's keys. Richard stood suddenly, ignoring his lawyer's hand on his arm. I wanted to give you a life, he shouted. Better than the one you would have had. The judge's gavel slammed. Mr. Whitmore, sit down. But I didn't flinch. I met his eyes, the same eyes that once looked at me with disgust, and said quietly, You didn't give me life. You stole it. His face crumpled. He sank back down, defeated. When I left the courtroom, the cold air outside hit me like a cleansing wind. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in years. Magnus was waiting near the steps, holding a warm coat open for me. You did well, he said softly. No, I whispered, taking his arm. I finally did right. For the first time, I wasn't running from my past. I was facing it and walking towards something real. ChatGPT Darnoy. It's been 6 months since the verdict. Richard and Vivian were convicted on multiple counts of kidnapping, fraud, and obstruction. They'll spend the rest of their lives behind bars. Two people who built their empire on deceit, now confined by their own lies. The news called it the Whitmore scandal of the century. But for me, it wasn't a scandal. It was liberation. I sold my apartment in Chicago. I couldn't stand the city anymore. Every corner whispered the ghost of who I used to be. Magnus offered me anything I wanted. A home, a trust, even a seat on the board of his company. But I told him no. I need to build something myself, I said. Something honest. So I reopened a workshop in Portland, the city where it all began. I called it Eleanor's Hands, after the mother who never stopped believing I'd return. The space smelled of sawdust and varnish again, just like before. But this time, it wasn't an escape. It was a tribute. Sometimes Magnus visits. He sits quietly, watching as I restore antique pieces, breathing life back into things time forgot. You got that from her, he told me once, smiling. Eleanor used to fix everything: broken toys, broken chairs, broken hearts. Every evening, before closing, I light a candle beside the box of letters from her. I've read each one at least a dozen times. Her handwriting has become a map I follow back to peace. One letter, the last one she ever wrote, ends with these words. If you ever find your way home, my darling girl, remember, your life didn't start with what was stolen. It starts with what you choose to rebuild. I've memorized that line. It's become my mantra. The mahogany desk I once restored for Richard now sits in my studio. Magnus bought it from the estate auction, insisting it should stay where it belongs with you. At first, I wanted to burn it. But then I realized that desk doesn't represent him. It represents me, the woman who turned pain into purpose. One afternoon, as the sun poured through the workshop windows, Magnus handed me a small velvet box. Inside was the matching silver bracelet, the one he'd worn for 35 years. I think, he said softly, they should be together again. I clasped it next to mine, feeling the cool metal against my skin, two halves of a promise finally whole. I'm not Harper Whitmore anymore. I'm Lila Eleanor Carver. And though my story began with lies and loss, it ends here in truth, in forgiveness, and in the quiet hum of a workshop by the sea, where every piece I restore feels like I'm repairing a little part of myself. Because sometimes, the life you were meant to live is the one you have to build with your own hands.